So I want to introduce Zach Hyder. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Hubbell Communications, all things Hubbell. He's going to give a little bit of information about his background and his work in communications and public affairs. So with that, Zach, join us.
First and foremost, thank you to Greg and Natalie and the team for having me in to wrap things up. I asked Greg, I said, this is the first time I've ever been a closing keynote, so do you have any advice or guidance on how to do that? And he said, just don't be boring. So I'm gonna do my absolute best to not be boring for the next half hour or so. Hopefully we get you guys out of here a little bit early. A lot of what you guys have been talking about today is the technical, the political, the policy, the regulations. It's been the administration of infrastructure. What I'm going to spend some time talking about today is, I keep touching that, I'm not supposed to do that, is the connections that we have with communities about infrastructure. And some of the things we get right, some of the things that oftentimes we misunderstand. So that's going to be the focus of this last portion of the day. But I want to begin with hearing from some of you, and I'm told that there might be some mics floating around. Yes, there are mics floating around. I'm curious, this is one of the reasons why I wanted you guys to come forward a little bit. What are some of your major takeaways from the conversations you've had here today? And for those of you that were part of the workshops yesterday, I'm just really curious to hear from some of you. What are your big takeaways when you guys walk out of here in 45 minutes?
Oregon may be subject to brownouts because of an insufficient supply of electricity and increasing demand, constraining economic development and community resilience.
Well said, sir. That guy has a future in PR. Very succinct. Yes, in the back.
I really liked how we acknowledged all the pieces that have to work together in order for our projects to happen. So it was beautiful to see the legislative representation here, along with the private-public partners.
Yeah. Quick show of hands. How many people in this room are from the private sector? Raise your hands. Nonprofit. Public. Government. Yeah. I got bad news for you guys later in this presentation, just so you know. I'm kidding, sort of. Any other thoughts, any other major takeaways? Big observations, things that you're gonna go home and tell your colleagues about learning here these last few days? I see a hand.
I'm inspired by everyone who's here. I know there's less of us here now, but I'm inspired by everyone who's here, and everyone's working really hard to try and find solutions. And I keep seeing things where I think more people have to start talking to each other across the different possible silos or different arms of the government or nonprofits. Because if we all share our information and knowledge, I think we're going to be unstoppable. But we just have to start doing, and we don't have to worry about it being perfect. We just have to start moving forward, and we'll figure it out as we go.
Very well said. And that is a beautiful transition. Was there one more? Oh. The winner of the raffle, Elizabeth.
Elizabeth Mazar-Myers, Executive Director at Westside Economic Alliance, and I think I don't know if it's a new realization for me, but a reaffirming that there's a political culture problem when it comes to thinking bold, building things, getting steel on the ground and infrastructure up in Oregon, and I think we need to address that.
Yeah. All great observations. I mean, the previous comment about talking to one another is a great segue into a lot of what I'm going to talk about, which is how we communicate with each other as stakeholders, but also how we communicate with communities for whom infrastructure has a big impact, positive impact, but also a lot of sometimes negative impacts. So one more question. I'm very curious to hear from all of you. What is the number one thing that you wish more people understood about infrastructure in this state? And I've heard a lot of opinions, so I know that there's going to be plenty of people that stand up and share their thoughts. But what is one thing that you really wish more people understood about infrastructure?
It's pretty simple for me. I just wish they understood how expensive it is and that it's definitely not a waste of money. It's our future.
Yeah. I see another hand back there.
I would just tell the general public that it's cheaper to maintain it than to fix it when it breaks.
Things are actually way worse and way more dire than generally people know about.
Thank you. Very uplifting message.
Maybe on a brighter note, the public health sort of miracle for a lot of people, when they turn on the tap, they don't even question the fact that clean, safe water will come out, that there will be water and they can drink it. And that's really impressive, and they never consider it until there's a problem.
Yeah. Raise your hand if you feel like infrastructure is everywhere for people and also invisible for everyone, right? I think we all feel that way. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why that is, right? Because we know, and I say we, the people in this room who work on and touch capital I infrastructure projects, whether you're on the policy side, the regulatory side, the funding side, if you're trying to build things, we all understand and know what we rely on infrastructure for, and we have these visuals in our head about why we want more people to understand it, right? There's a lot of very iconic things that if you show it to people and you tell them, but don't you think this was worth it? They'll say, yeah, absolutely, that was worth it. But I guarantee you that has anyone here read the David McCullough book on the Brooklyn Bridge? One person? You and I will have a conversation afterwards because it's a great book. It's a great book, but it was not easy to build. We look at it now and we take it for granted, right? That was always there. But we know that infrastructure is what makes everything around us. This goes back to what Angela was talking about at lunch. Infrastructure is everything. It is everywhere. It underpins all of the key sectors, all of the key pieces that make what we do in society. It's jobs, it's everything. So I will talk very briefly about what I do. So we're a public affairs firm, but we're a public affairs firm that specifically and exclusively works on land use issues. So if you are trying to build something, that's what we do, right? Whether it's community engagement, public involvement, communications, we try to get people talking about and helping people connect those dots about why building something, whether it's a data center or housing, why it's needed, how to do it, and shocking, how to manage and navigate the people who do not want to see it happen. That's just what we do. So let's talk. I want to show a few pictures, and this is a quiz. You guys didn't know how many questions there were going to be for you, did you? I told you it was going to be fun. I'm curious to know, I'm going to show a few pictures. Who can tell me what this picture is of? It's a very famous project, and the reason I show this is because it's the kind of project that when we ask people who are not in this room, who don't touch capital I infrastructure every day, it's kind of what comes to mind for a lot of them. Who said Big Dig?
Big Dig in Boston.
Big Dig in Boston, right? Legendary, over budget, over deadline project. Has anybody here actually been to Boston recently and seen it? Yeah, it's kind of amazing now. It was horrible getting there. Anybody? What is this a picture of? The bridge, yes, the bridge to nowhere and the road to nowhere they built after the bridge to nowhere didn't get funding, right? This is what people think of. This is what when you talk to the average person about, describe how we propose, fund, and implement and execute infrastructure projects, these are the things they think of. Anybody know what this is? Minneapolis, right? So we're surrounded the public, communities, are surrounded by this dichotomy of folks like us here in this room talking about why infrastructure is so important. Yes, it's expensive, but we need to fund it. And an echo chamber of what's wrong with spending money on infrastructure and why it's complicated and why we shouldn't do it. We can come up with a million reasons to never make those decisions, to make those investments, to build those projects, if you just look at how it's covered. No news organization has ever said, highway doesn't collapse, right? Bridge still standing. Millions of people got to work today and generated X number of dollars in gross domestic product. That's just not the world that we live in. So we, as the folks trying to talk about infrastructure, have to recognize that we're operating in an ecosystem. So let's talk about another visual. The infrastructure bill that passed 4 years ago is perhaps one of the foremost examples of how we had an opportunity in this country to educate people, connect with people, show people and explain to people what infrastructure is, why it matters to them, right? And the administration went above and beyond to try and tell the story of what it did with the infrastructure bill. They looked at where are the priorities. We want to make sure that we're talking with communities. They did events. They tried to figure out what are the projects the public most needs to see, right? This is an example of some polling that was done just after the bill was passed as far as like what are the public's priorities. Here's the problem. A year after its passage, only 24% of Americans even knew that it had become law, right? What happened? Any guesses? So this is just on the back end of COVID, right? There was, yes, sir. You can just shout. Yeah. It's like Angela was saying at lunch, you know, these regulatory decisions that get made when we create process on top of process, everything doesn't just go away overnight. It takes a long period of time. The same is true of infrastructure. And there's definitely a lot of finger pointing that folks have done. There's been tons of postmortems on what went wrong. We didn't communicate enough. We didn't tell our story enough. We didn't do enough events. But if you actually look back, I mean, that photo is one of thousands of examples of events that the White House and the administration did to tell its story. Part of it is, and by the way, I'm going to use comics throughout this. This is the reason I'm going to show examples of political cartoons is when we think about communications, when you see something like this, you instantly, without having to read a lot, without having to understand a lot, you kind of get it, right? You understand the message that it's saying about bureaucracy and not actually being able to deliver the goods, no pun intended, if you just look at this cartoon, while you're being told everything's going to be great, right? So this is one example, but here's something that I think is fundamentally very important, and a lot of folks in this room probably intuitively already understand this, is that there's a bit of a paradox. There's a conflict in how people perceive infrastructure. Infrastructure, if you just look at historic polling averages, infrastructure has very high support. Do you want these projects? Do you want this? Do you want these things in your community? Very high support. But it also is a very low priority, which is one of the reasons, again, why you can see there's this disconnect between people not understanding major legislation that passed. Gallup does a poll on a monthly basis on American priorities. Look at where our friend infrastructure is, right? So the comments that were shared earlier about helping people understand it's everything, it's everywhere, even though it's invisible, bears out the fact that if you ask people about a project, oh yeah, absolutely. If you ask them, well, is infrastructure a priority? Not as much. So how do we solve for that? I mean, we can't just necessarily throw up our hands and say, tough. Well, one thing is we have to admit to ourselves what we often get wrong. There's a lot of very smart people in this room, And that's a blessing and a curse, right? The way we talk about and think about and connect with each other about infrastructure is not necessarily the right way for us to do it when we go and talk with communities, right? So we've already established voters have very high support for infrastructure projects. Newsflash, they hate hearing about legislation and funding packages to pay for it. And when we typically talk with communities about infrastructure, guess what we're doing? Asking them for money, right? We're asking them to get behind billions of dollars, trillions of dollars, you name it, whether it's federal or local. The other thing is, we have a tendency to talk about infrastructure and understand all the facets that it covers. And the truth is, most people see a difference between access to infrastructure and what they really want, which is, I just want it to be better. So somebody made the comment earlier, you know, let's fix things as opposed to have to build new things because it will cost less and it will be better over the long term. That's actually what voters want. They don't want new, they don't want expanded, they just want better. And I'm going to talk more about that. Infrastructure is also not a solution to every problem. And this, again, Angela talked a little bit about this in her keynote as well, which is we in Oregon, we have to solve every problem through an idea or an issue. And I think if you look at the aggregate of feedback we've done our analysis of kind of how voters feel about it, they don't see it as a solution to climate change. They see it as a solution to getting to work, right? So we have to approach them, we have to talk to them in those terms. There's also a huge difference between how voters understand and prioritize hard infrastructure, soft infrastructure. And if you just look at here in Oregon, we've had a lot of conversations around the transportation bill lately. What ends up often kind of rising to the top of the narrative is the prioritization of the softer side. Why did the I-5 bridge, what was it, 2012? What was the issue with the I-5 bridge replacement 15 years ago? Mass transit, right? Soft infrastructure, we don't want that. Why did mass transit, say what you will about the politics at the ground level, but why did mass transit bring down a bridge? It's not down yet, it's still standing. Last time I checked. What was that? Right, but we led with this idea that this was somehow non-negotiable. And at the end of the day, what we care about, what most communities care about is hard infrastructure. Roads, bridges, water systems, it's the basics. So the more we can stick to that, the better. The other thing is we also have to admit to ourselves that when we go talk to communities about infrastructure, when we think about the messaging, we are automatically talking about things that people hate, right? It's process, it's bureaucracy, it's things like, raise your hand if you're an engineer. There's only one engineer in this room? No. They're at the bar, yes. See, engineers are smart. They made a beeline for the bar. They didn't want to listen to this PR guy talk about infrastructure stuff, right? But we automatically have to recognize that we are approaching people, talking to them about stuff they don't want to talk about. And it's why most people, when they experience the impacts of infrastructure, this is what they experience, right? And it is a long game, right? When we're talking about these issues, I was having a conversation with someone earlier about 217, the construction that's been going on up there, right? I know as a taxpayer, as a commuter, it will eventually be better. I hope. Someday. But man, it is painful getting there. And so when you then talk to me about, oh, but let us talk to you about another project, guess what voters do? Guess what communities think? So the other thing is the words that we use, royal we in this room, are not necessarily the words that work. This is another issue we have. So we love, and again, I'm a PR person. I love me a $5 word. But we talk about these things. We've dressed it up with these words like mobility and vision and innovation. It's actually not what worked. If you go back and look at where there has been success in connecting with voters, they want fast, safe, reliable, effective, efficient. Those 5 things. Say it over and over again, right? When you start talking about growth, what growth for whom? What does that mean, right? But it sounds good, right? That's what's going to make things better, is this growth. So I'm going to share a few data points from a poll that we just wrapped up at the end of August. We do a series of benchmark polls throughout the year. Since I knew I was coming in to talk to all of you guys, I thought I would throw some questions in about infrastructure. This was a statewide poll. It was a 300 sample, I will say, for those of you that have done polling and you think you have to have a 600-person sample, statistically it actually doesn't make a huge difference. You have a slightly higher margin of error, but statistically the outcomes are roughly the same. I'm not going to spend a time going through this, but just know we try to weight it and make sure that we're getting an accurate representation of the statewide population as best possible. So before I get into this, another comic for you, right? Something that, again, when you see it, you get it. Like, you understand what the fundamental issue is for the average person that is hearing about the capital I infrastructure and what they perceive. Okay, so what are the priorities that people had in our poll? Who here works in water systems, or excuse me, who here works on roads, bridges? Hands up, hands up. What? There's not a person in this room that does roads and bridges? This is the infrastructure summit, right? Construction, policy, administration, government, right? All of you. Here, that's the answer. Many of you in this room work on roads and bridges. Number one priority, right? I think the important thing to kind of take away with this, again, is the stuff that we end up getting stuck on, right? There's been a lot of discussion right now in Salem about the issue of EVs and charging and the fees associated with that, right? Low priority for Oregonians. And again, it gets back to what we were talking about, hard versus soft. So like repairing what we have, making the basics work, and specifically making the basics better are what they ultimately want to see. Another comic for you. I will pause so you can laugh. Raise your hand if you have ever heard someone say something that you're like, do you realize that what you want and what you're saying contradict each other, right? Again, it's because the thing is invisible. It's sometimes so hard to make it tangible for folks, they don't even realize that they're actually for the thing that they're against. So we asked people this question: do you agree with this statement that investing in things like rural broadband, clean water, data centers, internet service, that it pays off in a strong economy, good jobs, opportunities for small business? All the things that Angela was talking about in her keynote. Good news, yeah, people love it, it's great. Here's another comic, also from Angela's talk. Where is Angela here? She's probably gone back to Salem, because she set me up for this very well. All right, so what about the issue of taxes? That's the other thing that we hear about. The reason that so much infrastructure can't happen is because it costs too much. It's basically a hidden tax increase. So we asked the question, do you agree? Taxes in Oregon are way too high. The state should reduce taxes, even if it means cuts to spending on roads and infrastructure projects. Does that number make anybody feel a little squeamish, right? Newsflash, voters can contradict each other, can contradict themselves. I love this one. Wait for it, wait for it. Okay, so let's talk about cost. Somebody said this earlier. Delaying infrastructure repairs and maintenance only drives up the cost later on. Yeah, we have a lot of economists in the public. They get it. 90%, that's extremely high. So here's two contradictory statements that I think are really important, because part of what I always want to know as a communicator is people's mindset. So which of the following statements resonates with people? Investing in infrastructure drives economic growth because it provides the things that private business needs to operate. 64%, very good. Or investment in infrastructure comes at the expense of private business that is forced to pay higher taxes and drives businesses out of Oregon. Newsflash, I will also share this with you. A lot of political alignment. Who do you want to guess is in the 64%? Democrats. Right? Left of center. Here's something fascinating. In our sample size, does anybody know what the largest demographic of voters in the state of Oregon is? Yes, it's not Republicans, it's not Democrats, it's non-affiliated independent voters. The 35% number that you see here, yes, is Republican, but it is also a lot of independent voters, right? So that's something that we have to pay attention to, is because when infrastructure becomes politicized, as we all know, that can be a bit of a problem. This is another one that I love. And that's why I asked how many people in here work for the government. Right? This is nothing new. The public has trust issues when it comes to the role of government in their lives. So I'm going to show you 4 examples of things that we ask people. Why do you feel infrastructure projects in Oregon are not getting built? Too slow, too complicated, bureaucratic. It's NIMBYs, environmentalists, government waste, fraud, and abuse, or general lack of funding. Does anybody want to guess what the top scoring category was? I'm blind. 2? So restrictions and delays by environmentalists and NIMBYs. Slow, complicated, bureaucratic, legal, public involvement process. You're saying government waste, fraud, and abuse. 3. Okay. There's slow, complicated, bureaucratic process. Environmentalist NIMBYs. Government waste, fraud, and abuse. General lack of funding, right? Now, I'll be honest with you. As somebody who is interested in this research, I went in fully thinking that the NIMBYism, environmentalist process stuff was going to score higher, right? Because again, we've made things very complicated for ourselves in the state of Oregon. But there is this trust perception, there is this issue that people have in their minds that is preventing us from doing things we want to do, which is, but I cannot trust that it will be done in a way that makes good use of the dollars, right? It's a huge barrier for us. So I want to conclude this by talking a little bit about the noise factor. Raise your hand or hold your phone in the air if you have a phone with you right now, right? So you all are just getting tired. So when I talk about noise, yes, thank you. When I talk about noise, turn the lights off. Let's get that going. Just kidding. When I talk about noise, that's what I'm talking about. We all have a lot of noise in our life. We have a lot of information that is coming at us on a regular basis. And here's the thing that we trip up on as folks trying to communicate with communities about infrastructure, is that we don't understand the fundamental psychology that messes with our ability to connect these issues for people, right? The first is we live in a world, in an ecosystem now of redirection, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons why Republicans are for it, Democrats are against it. Democrats are for it, Republicans are against it. Left, right, you know, we have created an us versus them ecosystem for ourselves. The other is this message around avoiding disruption, right? We shouldn't solve this problem. We don't need that. There's actually other technological things that will come along later, and we'll figure it out. That is another huge issue that adds to the noise. Another thing is distraction, right? Oh, this is a hidden. Here's something you always hear. This is a hidden sales tax. That's a great distraction tactic. But another great distraction tactic is policy perfectionism. Has anyone in here ever seen great policy die because it wasn't perfect? Once again, we're not going to do that because somebody didn't get this thing they wanted over here, right? The good being the perfect being the enemy of the good. And the last thing is just defeatism, right? Sometimes I feel like that bridge between Oregon and Washington has really suffered from this idea of it's impossible. It'll always be too expensive. It'll always be too complicated. It's never going to happen. Oh, you know, now we've got a new administration. Federal funding's going out there. It's never going to happen, right? So again, this is the echo chamber that most of us live in, and this is what it results in. Because guess what we do, right? We, everyone in this room, we then go out and say, hey, let us tell you about this great infrastructure project. And let us tell you all the reasons why it's great. Well, I've already heard all this other stuff in my noise ecosystem, And I'm so confused, I don't know who to believe. I don't necessarily know that this is even worth it. So I disengage, I don't pay attention, and now we're back to that 24% don't even know this stuff is happening in their own backyard. So I want to reframe for everyone this idea of what we really are managing when we go in and talk to folks about this stuff. Because the truth is, yes, it's infrastructure. Yes, all the benefits that go with it. Yes, all the reasons why we need it. But we're actually asking communities to embrace something that is very hard for the human brain, and that is change. That is ultimately the communication challenge that we're doing. So if you're familiar with what's called the change curve, this is kind of what happens to the human brain as you ask it to do something different, new, right? We're going to build a highway here. We're going to build a bridge here. We're going to, redesign the airport. How awful was it going to PDX during that construction? And how amazing is it now, right? What is happening? That's the first thing that happens. And then we get to this stage of, nah, not happening, won't happen. This, by the way, is where most policy, most great ideas end up dying, especially in the state of Oregon, right? We hit a brick wall, done. We're not going to push it forward anymore. Look at what's happening with offshore wind. Too many people are against it. We can't. It's too complicated. Then, if we actually manage to push people through this little roller coaster, we get to a point of frustration. Well, wait a minute. Why is this happening again? Why are we supposed to do this? I don't understand this. This is complicated. Help me understand why this is important. And then eventually we get to a state of depression. Why is this happening to me? This is horrible. My property value is going to be destroyed. My commute's going to be awful. The most important part of this curve is this up level, and it's where we typically stop ourselves before we even get to it. Now we have the opportunity to help communities say, okay, I accept, but what are we going to do to make it better? How can I be part of the process for improving on this idea, whatever it is? Then we get to a decision point. All right, I'm for it. And then the very last point, holy shit, we did it. And it works, right? That is how the human brain works. And we are asking people to embrace change every time we go out and look for public permission to do the work that all of us in this room do. So, last point, and then I have some pretty visuals. Let's talk about I want to end on the language of infrastructure and specifically things that oftentimes we get wrong, things that we need to be doing. First and foremost, you are not your target audience. Say it with me. You are not your target audience. It is so hard to remember that. As I was listening to the various sessions and panel discussions and the workshops throughout the day, I'm like, man, there's some I feel so much better as an Oregonian to know that all of you are working on this. And you're really damn smart. And the problem is that can be very difficult to communicate to people who don't fundamentally understand it, right? Give me fast, give me efficient, give me safer, give me better. The second thing is you need to build connections. I'm stealing this from my friend Elizabeth over here. Build connections before you need them. We need to be talking about infrastructure every single day of the year. Not when we want public permission to build something or fund something or change something or move something or disrupt something. We need to be talking about it it is the thing that makes everything work. We need to be talking about it all the time. Don't solve every problem for everyone. Recognize and admit that yes, building this thing, the bike lanes, yes, climate change is real, all those things. A lot of people, it's just not about those things, right? It's give me the examples of what it really means to me, the average person. Focus on the big picture as opposed to the loudest voices. Anybody ever seen a project not happen because 3 people really made a stink about it? Yeah, that's what happens. I also say this going back to the fact there's a lot of very smart people in this room. A lot of people in my profession will say, oh, you need to educate the public. I actually think that that is a false ask. Guess what? They don't care. They don't care. And they don't care as much as you want them to care. So Don't educate because they ultimately aren't going to meet you at that level, right? You got to connect. Don't educate, connect. Simple is better. Visuals will win. I leave you with that. So let's get back to the story of infrastructure is about the things that we can see, feel, and touch and experience. It's the environments that when they're done, that everybody loves. It's that Brooklyn Bridge, right? It's the Panama Canal, things that were impossible to do, right? That's our job as people that work on these issues. And the average person is going to have a very hard time being able to create these visuals, but we know them when we see them. We understand the examples of them, but it is at the end of the day about a vision for the future of what's going to make Oregon awesome. Going back to how Angela concluded her keynote, I will steal from her, which is that we got to get back to making this place the amazing place that most of us that grew up here ultimately know that it is and it can be. So that's the conclusion of my presentation. You may clap. Thank you. But I'm not going to do the thing that I know most people do, which is give you the mic and let you ask me questions. I'm going to ask you a question. I am very curious. I have listened to talks on housing, ports, you name it, all these issues that are really important issues to the state of Oregon, but also your local communities. I would love to hear from all of you. What actions are you going to take walking away from today in everything that you heard that is going to build momentum to do these hard things, to create the vision that Elizabeth talked about that we need to articulate? What are the things that you feel like you are now committed to doing? And I'll let that sink in while the mics rove. What's one thing you can do or want to do, plan to do, commit to do?
Start to build connections with those people in the community that always have the loudest voices.
There you go. Yeah. It's hard. So my colleague, JP, where is he? Where's JP? There he is. Again, we work on projects all the time throughout the state, urban, suburban, rural, and we run into those loudest voices a lot, right? The opposition groups, just to put a label on them. And we have a client for a project that we're building down in Central Oregon who we just love. His name is Jaron. He is not afraid to go talk to those people and just say, let's have a conversation. The number of times that we get into, and again, a lot of what I just talked about, it's also fraught with litigation, right? The instant we get into this us versus them posture, we're not having a conversation about what is the concern. What is the concern really that you have here? How might we actually maybe have more in common than you realize? It is a hard thing to do, but it is okay to do it. It is definitely okay to do it. Other actions, things that you are feeling inspired to do walking away from this. Not this presentation, this day. Sir.
It's easy often to go back to work and then all of a sudden everything's the same. So for me, I want to keep the conversations going that we've been having here with smaller groups and see if we can try to make some of those changes.
Yes. That is a very, I love that because there's a lot of energy. I mean, how many of you have heard something today, yesterday, the 2 days you've been here, that you're like, I didn't know that. That's really interesting. That's really inspiring. That I learned something, right? Holding on to that energy when you leave can be hard, right? Because, oh, I got that deadline. That's got to happen. That's got to happen. That's got to happen. But as much as possible to keep that energy of what you learned, what inspired you going. I saw another hand. I took my glasses off so I can't see. Yes?
This is
On? Hello? Oh, perfect. I work for the Oregon Department of Energy, and that thing that you said about we are not the audience, right, really sticks with me. I don't come from a background in energy, and I thank every colleague that I've ever worked for to explain everything to me, and I think through that process has been really helpful in having our colleagues explain something to someone who they don't understand. Right, and so using that energy strategy that we're developing and going out into communities and reaching people that might not be the right consumer of that document and how it affects them, because everyone uses energy.
I'm glad to hear you say that that's something you're going to take away, because I actually think that is one of the best things any of us can do. We did a focus group years ago. I won't go into the details. But I can remember you're listening to 10 people on the other side of a one-way mirror talk about something that they don't understand. And I remember sitting with the folks that we were working with, and they were like, this is such a waste of time. These people are idiots. And I'm like, exactly. They don't know what you're talking about. You do, they do not. They may be able to get there, but we've got to start a conversation with them, and it's going to take them time. This is not normal for most people, the stuff that we talk about in this room. So it's such a great, I'm glad to hear somebody's walking away with that. Anything else? Where's the bar? I know. Yes, I see more hands. I said bar, and all of a sudden hands went up. I love that.
It goes along with the same line. I'm Becky Bryan. I'm a regional project manager with Business Oregon, but I serve Oregon's 23 ports. And we've been talking here about telling our story, and a lot of people don't know the story of ports. And so how do we tell our story? And I think it goes along with that we probably need to address what the audience is and maybe really change our story or change who we think we're talking to as we figure out what it is. I don't know how many of our ports are still here in the room, but we should all take that message with us so we can, get to work on that.
Yeah. It's hard to, I think, ultimately look outside of yourself and the work that you're doing every single day. And I think the most important thing is whenever you're in a meeting, and we've all been in them, where you hear yourself or the folks in the room saying, if only more people knew what we knew, you're losing the messaging battle, right? Because your tendency is going to be to want to explain, to educate, to cram facts. I mean, it's very difficult for people to remember one bit of information, much less 5 economic statistics. So that's a good default mechanism of, wait a minute, if we're talking like that, let's reset. What have we not done to put ourselves in the seats of people who aren't going to understand this the way we do? There was one other hand up. Yes?
Yeah, thank you. Wow, it's louder than I thought. So I'm working with a small community, the city of Monroe, down in the Willamette Valley. And one of the issues they're facing right now is water and wastewater. They have to put a moratorium potentially on both systems. And people are asking, how did we get to this point? Why didn't we know about this? Why haven't rates gone up over these last several years? Why is this now coming to our attention? I think the problem with local governments is we don't revisit our capital improvement plan. In fact, this city doesn't have one, so they have to develop it just so they can use their SDC fees. It's important that I think that we have these conversations with communities. Every time we brush off the transportation system plan, how does that integrate into the conversations we're going to need to have about infrastructure in the future? The same thing goes when we start looking at our comprehensive plan or rezoning or any of the state laws that are requiring us to increase housing densities. We really need to start talking about what's in it for me, the WIFM, that is in front and center for those folks in their minds. I think getting away from what we care about, as you were saying, and really communicating with them in the nuts and bolts that they understand is key. Those are the conversations the city is starting right now that I'm leading at this moment. And that's when you start to get an understanding, even if people don't quite buy in yet. They at least understand, and you start to see a little bit more showing at those public meetings.
Yeah. Well, and you just used, so here's a great example of where words matter. and I'm going to go out on a limb. I bet if you were to do another poll of Oregonians and ask them, are you for housing in the state of Oregon? Are you for building more housing? Probably be like that 90% number, yes. Are you for housing density? What does that mean, right? So there's another great example of something that we intuitively understand what that is, why it's good. It's part of our vernacular. It's part of the ABCs of development, planning, and infrastructure. But when you ask people, and I've seen a lot of polls, I'm sure you guys have too, where you're like, yeah, but did the person responding even understand the question? So we have to dial back some of our language in order to accomplish exactly what you're talking about. I have one last thought, which is next time, closing speaker, there should be a bar running in the back. No one will leave, Greg, and this conversation will get real interesting. So with that, I'm going to say thank you guys very much. Appreciate your time.
You didn't disappoint, Zach. You were entertaining. Nobody fell asleep. The audience was engaged. I think that's a win. Some great information. And speaking of information, we do record these sessions. They will be available in the next week or so, and you'll get information about the posting of these videos of the keynote sessions. Also, we'll have throughout the day, if a speaker said, yes, you can share my information, you can share the presentations, those will be available. You'll get information about that via email as well, and as well as a survey. And we'd love to get your feedback on future topics, what you liked, what we can improve upon. More front row seating is kind of what I heard, is we need more front row seating. So with that, Saporin, thank you for you and your staff for partnering on this summit. Thank you, sponsors, and thank you for attending.